Just I was looking through my library at my parents' house. Some of the books that didn't fit here, so I left them at my parents' house in the library. And I didn't remember that I had some of the books that I had there. So last night I was there, and I found, right before I left the house, I found this book, which I don't remember when I bought it. I remember I bargained with some guy to get it from him. He didn't know what it was worth, so he sold it to me for not what it should have. And this is a book called The Song of the Levim. It's all the laws that a Levi needs to know. So if you're a Levi, or your husband's a Levi, or someone's a Levi, this is all the laws of the Levim. And it looks like it's a pretty nice cover on the outside, but in the inside...
Oh, it's old. It's old.
It was printed in Poland 114 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And I couldn't believe that I had it. I was just looking at it. Baruch Hashem, the rabbis who gave this book its Haskamot, the one in the middle is Rav Kook's father-in-law.
Wow. Oh my God.
So it's not Rav Kook's generation, who passed away in the 30s. It's the generation before that. Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grudzinski, who was the rabbi of Lithuanian Jewry back in those days. Rav Chaim Ozer Grudzinski, just by the way, if you want a story. The Chavetz Chaim. You know the Chavetz Chaim? The rabbi who wrote the book on Lashon Hara. He wrote a book on the 6 volumes on Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Berurah. The Chavetz Chaim was not actually a rabbi. We call him Rabbi Yisrael Meir Cohen Kagan. I mean, he was a bigger rabbi than any rabbi we know, but he wasn't a rabbi. He didn't have official ordination from anybody, as is the norm. Most rabbis who teach Torah, yeshiva rabbis, are not ordained as rabbis because they're not necessarily going to serve in the capacity of a community rabbi or a rabbi in a court or one of they're teachers of Torah inside of the yeshiva. So the way you determine that is how much Torah do you actually know. So far as to go to the joke that if you're a rabbi that actually knows something, you don't even have to go take a smicha test, because smicha tests are only for the rabbis who don't know anything, so they have to pass the test. That was so the Chavetz Chaim had a big problem. He had to get over the border from Poland to, I don't know, whichever country was next to Poland. Russia, I don't know where he was going. I don't know which direction he was traveling to. It could be. And so he was crossing over the border, and they wouldn't let him through because they asked him, "What is your profession?" He said, "I'm a rabbi." "Well, where are your papers that you're a rabbi?" "I don't have papers that I'm a rabbi. I just am a rabbi." They showed him the book that he wrote. They don't understand Hebrew. He said, "Well, either you need to have some kind of profession, or we can't let you through." So they immediately sent a telegram to Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grudzinski, and he sent back like a 5-word telegram giving him smicha in a telegram. And that was considered his official documentation that he was a rabbi. That's when the Chavetz Chaim got smicha. So maybe it shares the... For example, both of my grandparents were called rabbi. Rabbi this and rabbi that. And they both had synagogues, and they weren't actually rabbis in the sense. They didn't have diplomas to show they were rabbis, but they knew a lot more than most of the people who do have diplomas have. So it's an interesting term. We've changed what the definition of rabbi means for something that's less than what it used to mean, but we won't consider the people before us rabbis because they don't have the proper paperwork. That's what happens when Judaism becomes bureaucratic. But if you wanted to see this, I'm going to pass it around. It's a very interesting print, a clear print for that long year.
So it has all the laws of the Levim.
Yeah, and commentaries on them.
It relates back to the time in the Beit HaMikdash.
Well, this generation was an interesting generation. This generation was convinced that very soon the Mashiach was going to come. The reason is, consciously or subconsciously, you have to imagine what was happening. The Jews were in exile for 2,000 years. And all of a sudden, Jews get up, about 100 and some years ago, maybe even more, and they started traveling to Israel. Not David Ben Gurion and his chevra. This is years before that. Years, generations before that. The first pioneers to Israel were students of the Vilna Gaon. You had the Bilu movement, also were religious people. The early immigrants to Israel were religious Jews, the pioneers, the settlers. Only later did secular Zionism catch on to this movement, and then made history start whenever Theodor Herzl had some kind of vision at the the Dreyfus trial and all the other nonsense that happened over there. But essentially, that's not when the Aliyah to Israel happened. You have to imagine what it's like. You're a Jew sitting in Europe or in any other country you were in as a Jew, and suddenly Jews are getting up and going to Israel. That never happened before. It was not something that was ever done. Nobody went to Israel. People who went, maybe they died on the way, or they died coming back, or they died while they were there. It wasn't a normal thing to do, to go to Israel. You don't go there for a bar mitzvah in the 1800s. It didn't happen. As the fact that Jews started going, it awakened this, I want to call it a messianic movement, but a feeling that maybe something is changing. Now we take it for granted. You take it, there are Jews in Israel, there are Jews in America, there are Jews in... When you say there are Jews in Israel, that should blow your mind. There's a Jewish country in Israel. That should, your brain shouldn't know what to do with that. But it does, because you're already 100 years into this messianic process that we've already begun. So that generation, many things started happening. There was a rabbi called the Chavetz Chaim, we just mentioned him.
But there were always some Jews living in Israel.
Always Jews living in Israel, but the fact that Jews would get up as a movement to go and take over Israel, not in our history. So, but that's a good point. Yeah, Israel was never free of Jews. It just...
Well, not until Theodor Herzl, at least.
Before Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl was already halfway through the process. Theodor Herzl hijacked the bandwagon. And then all of his friends afterwards. By the way, we have a problem. In history, they say history books are written by whoever won the war. Right? That's like, you sit in America and you hear about the Revolutionary War. I don't know what they teach in England. But I'm sure that it's a little different than what we teach here. Our entire Revolutionary War books are how patriotic we are, how we won, we fought against injustice, and I don't know what it's, I've never asked somebody in England, but what it sounds like on the other side of the world. But history is always subjective to who started it, or who won it, or who continued it, or who was most successful. And so you'll hear things like, oh, Jews did... Which kind of Jews did that? Or you're hearing it from a perspective. So Theodor Herzl, the people who used his legacy, used it for their own purposes to show that our history began with him. But it was another step on the ladder of getting Jews back to Israel. I'm not taking away from him what he did, but it just wasn't necessarily the beginning. But it was pretty good he woke up a lot of Jews who were not necessarily connected to the Jewish tradition to realize the importance of having their own country. That was something he did do. Something that probably the rabbis of the world could not do. So definitely he had a part in bringing back other Jews to the land of Israel. But
they were also thinking of going to other countries.
sure, I think we gave a class like 3 years ago on Theodor Herzl. Let me just say, not the kind of man I would ever put a picture up on my wall. Not because he wasn't
even like Jews.
Yeah, right. It was a rabid anti-Semite in the first step. But aside from that, it was...
That's why I never understood why he did what he did. This doesn't make sense.
Rav Kook has an essay on this. And he says that there is something called personal tshuva, a connection to Hashem that you have in you made a decision, I'm coming close to Hashem, I'm going to take certain steps to help the Jewish people, to then help the world. And then you have something called a subconscious tshuva, which Hashem decides that a people are going to reach a certain level of understanding that they didn't intend to. You could perhaps think the generation that ended slavery or racism or whatever it would be, it wasn't something that one person got, I'm going to change the world. Something collective happened, even on a subconscious level, that the people who used to think differently also changed. The same thing happened, you go to Israel and you see what made people who were socialists, they didn't believe, not in just Jews, they didn't want to be Jewish. They didn't even use the word Jewish. They changed their name to Hebrews, to Israelites, to all kinds of things, just so that they would not use that derogatory word called Jew. Because they didn't want any connection to Judaism. But why did you come and fight malaria and plagues and swamps and Arabs and British, and what was the point? Why did you do it? The answer, Rav Kook says, it was a subconscious tshuva that Hashem just sent a certain spirit into the people, and you see, this is the result. It's not necessarily logical. Yeah, but we had pogroms for thousands of years before that. We could have done this many times before. Sure, there are thinkers in the Jewish world. Rabbi Yonatan, who was the chief rabbi of Jerusalem and later a big opponent to Rav Kook. Rav Chaim Yosef Sonnenfeld said that it was our choice to wait 2,000 years. We didn't have to. He held that the moment we left Israel, we could have come back right away, but we chose not to. And he used to say in the Musaf prayer, we say, "Mipnei chateinu galinu ma'artzenu," because of our sins, we were exiled from our land. V'nitrachachnu ma'al admatenu, and then we were also distanced from our soil. So Rav Sonnenfeld used to say, "Nitrachachnu ma'al admatenu birtzonenu," that we were exiled because of our sin, but we chose to stay in exile because that's where we felt most comfortable. It's something to think
I have a
about.
question. In the late 1800s, when you're talking about, could anyone just go and show up in Palestine at the time?
Not
I
necessarily.
mean, did you need papers? Did you need a visa?
It belonged to the British.
That's
So
what
the
I'm saying.
British wouldn't let you
to
in.
the Turkish.
But,
To the
but,
Turks.
but it was the Turks until 1914. So, how
We're
did
talking
they,
about the Turkish.
So did the Turks just let people in prior to
I don't know what Turkish
So my
policy was.
grandfather
So
went
voluntary
five
to stay
times
away, that's what she's
to
saying.
see whether
Maybe
he could settle there. So he could go. He was a lawyer. He went 5 times to see whether he could
Okay,
settle
so-
there.
so-
He always came back and said, "I can't support a family with 5 kids. I just can't. There's
Okay.
nothing here."
It
for me
seems
to
like
do."
once you were from anywhere in the Ottoman Empire, getting to Israel was a matter of can you physically do it. Not necessarily are you allowed to do it. You'll find that Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, for example, when he decides in Ukraine he wants to make it to Israel, he first travels to Turkey in order to be able to, I don't know if he had to get papers, I don't know what he had to do, but to leave from there was considered, that's the place you went in order to.
I see.
And this is actually what, interestingly enough, Rabbi Nachman himself writes, this is what kept away most Ashkenazi Jews from trying to come to Israel. Because the country, the places you had to travel through spoke Arabic. And it wasn't a European language, it wasn't something that they were able to get along with.
It was too tedious a journey.
It was very hard. He said you would get on a boat and nobody understood who you were, what you need, if you needed anything. He said it was a very dangerous thing. Rabbi Nachman himself almost died a few times on the way there and on the way back. So the British Empire, it opened up some doors but closed other doors. I believe the British were more... Somebody who reads about the way the British treated the Jews in those years, you won't have a lot of love for the British government afterwards. And you might actually realize that we were Jewish terrorists at a certain point. We did a lot of things that
Yeah.
were we did crazy. I mean, Mordechai Eliyahu, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, Allah Shalom, bless his memory, he was on a terrorist list because he was one of the people who participated in the explosion of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem.
Yeah, but so was Menachem Begin.
Right, but this was the chief rabbi, so they consider him a world-renowned terrorist, so to speak. But for us, he was a freedom fighter. He was again, history is determined by who won the war, right? That's the way it works.
Correct.
In this time, so the Chavetz Chaim started a kollel, a yeshiva, just for men who were kohanim. And he believed that we're going to come to Israel very soon, and there's not going to be some Messiah that's going to come teach you all the laws of the Kehuna. And so how is a Kohen going to know how to build a temple? How is a Kohen going to know what to wear when he comes to the temple? How is a Kohen going to know what to do? How to light the menorah, how to bake the bread that you have to bake. All kinds of things that might happen. And so the Chavetz Chaim started a kollel just for Kohanim. And here, in Europe, in Radin, in Poland. And here is where worlds collide. The Chavetz Chaim is sitting in Poland having this kollel. And joining this kollel is a rabbi from Bialystok, named Rabbi Avram Yitzchak Kohen Kook. Rav Kook, he was a Kohen. So he came to join this kollel for Kohanim, because he also wanted to go to Israel. And he became a student of the Chavetz Chaim. By the way, nobody will tell you that Rav Kook was a student of the Chavetz Chaim. It doesn't look good for the Chavetz Chaim to have a student like Rav Kook. The next part of the story, they definitely don't tell you. After a certain amount of time in the Chavetz Chaim's kollel, the Chavetz Chaim told Rav Kook, you are wasted talent here. We need you to go to Israel already. And he sent him to Israel to accept the job of a chief rabbi of Israel. And that's what happened. He became the chief rabbi of Israel because Chavetz Chaim sent him from Poland to Israel. Which is why, again, if you look in the history books, there was a group called Agudat Yisrael. You heard of them?
Yes, it's still there.
Agudas Yisrael. They're still around.
Yes, they're still around.
Again.
I worked for one.
Again, history is written by whoever won the war. Agudat Yisrael was a rabidly anti-Zionist movement. Absolutely from its core. in its origin. Today, most Orthodox rabbis who are not what you would call modern Orthodox probably belong to, if not that organization, then an umbrella of that organization. Or an offshoot of that organization. Or something connected to that organization. Agudat Yisrael could rightfully say that they are the spokespeople for Eastern European Jewry even today, but definitely then. It's an interesting thing. Agudat Yisrael was formed to fight the Reform movement and the Zionist movement. It was a group of rabbis that got together and said, hey, we have to unite. So no more Hasidim, no more Mitnagdim, the first time Hasidic rabbis and non-Hasidic rabbis sat together was because they were going to war against other people. That's what brought the unity. By the way, if you ever want to unite, you just hate somebody else, and then everybody will jump on the bandwagon. I'm sure, by the way, that in Agudat Israel Yeshivas, they don't teach this history the way I'm glorifying it at this moment. Big tzaddikim, the very righteous rabbis were part of this movement. It was the movement that saved European Jewry in the history books. Certain groups refused to join onto this group. For example, Chabad. The Lubavitcher Rebbe's always operated separately, never ever with groups. There was one time in history that I can tell you the Chabad worked with another Jewish organization, and that was about 250 years ago. They are a group of, it's a loner group. My wife's Hasidut is the same thing. Stolen. They don't sit on any other boards with other Rebbes and other Hasiduyot. They do their own thing. They're not involved. They have their own way, their own rabbi, and that's what they do. They don't sit with other people on the same table. It's an interesting approach, but you should know that this is what led to, once the fight between the Hasidim and the Mitnagdim fell apart, and nobody was fighting anymore, the reason why the fight was still focused on certain Hasidic groups, like Chabad, or like Breslov, or other movements, were because those were the ones who refused to join the united coalition of Agudat Israel. And so it's not that history was just cruel. Certain choices were made, and those choices were made, we're going to be out of the loop. When you're out of the loop, though, you don't have the protection of being part of the union or part of the so politics, nothing happens in a vacuum. No, nothing takes place in a vacuum.
They set themselves apart.
Right, and I probably would have made the same decision if I was in that situation. But people had to pay the price for that later in history.
Yeah.
You know, when Rav Shach gave his famous speech attacking the Lubavitcher Rebbe, a sad moment in modern Jewish history where two giants of the world who were trying to fix the world spent fighting each other all the time. The Lubavitcher Rebbe and Rav Shach from Bnei Brak. Rav Shach stood up and he said, I'm a Baal Machloket. Did you say that I'm the one who's always fighting with people? He said, but it's not me. He says, they never join us. He says, we have common wars that we're fighting, and why have I never got their help? That was his fight. That was his argument. I think both sides of the coin were wrong, but that's just my opinion. In this group, you had one other Rebbe that was there. His name was the Satmar Rebbe.
Yes.
Rabbi Yonatan Halevy. Have you heard his name?
Yes.
We've spoken about him before.
Yes.
If you're talking about anti-Zionists, Rabbi Teitelbaum took the cake. He wrote the book on it. It's literally, he has a book against Zionism and Orthodox Jewish thought. And here's what happened. They were all sitting part of the same rabbinic congress, the Agudat Israel. And
They belong to Agudat?
Sure. And the head of Agudat Israel today is the Novominsker Rebbe. He's a Hasidic Rebbe. Even though it's perceived as a Lithuanian Jewish group, it's led by Hasidim today.
From where?
Borough Park.
Well, I just want to
Novominsk is somewhere, but I don't know where.
I just wondered
Now from Borough Park. So, Agudat Israel had a branch in Israel, and they sent speakers to represent themselves at the first rabbinic convention in, I believe it was, Vori?
Yeah.
First Agudat Israel convention was Vienna? Where?
I would like to say like Lithuania, where Rabbi Yonatan Halevy was. I don't know if that's true.
Okay, wherever that first was. All these rabbis, it was a world event. You may have actually seen videos recently of the Chavetz Chaim walking. It's the first video that we just found in 100 years. It's from this event. All these rabbis got together. And the Chavetz Chaim was famous as he left this event. He left it in the middle. And they tell you that he wasn't feeling well. But that's not actually true. It's not what happened in the history books of their posters. You know, Jews are always plastering signs places or whatever. On those signs of that year, you find that the Chavetz Chaim was sitting in the Agudat Israel convention, and those messengers from the branch in Israel came to speak. And they stood up and started speaking about this evil chief rabbi in Israel. How he is working with the Zionists, and how he's allowing for secularism, and how we don't even know if he really keeps the Torah, and all kinds of things they were saying. So the Chavetz Chaim stood up. He said, stop, you cannot speak like that about Rav Kook. He's my student. And they kept talking. And so he stood up and he left. And when they tried to bring him back to the convention, that I will not speak as long as those people were given the podium. And when they came to leave, listen to the irony, they came to get a blessing from him before they departed. He was the leader of the generation. They came to get a blessing, he would not open the door. He said, I cannot say hello to people who speak like that about Rabbi Kook. And so when they walked away from his hotel, he told his students, Sofan shel edu lehishtamed. The end, the result of these people will that they will leave Judaism. They will convert to another religion. That's what he said. And so the Chavetz Chaim, till the end of his life, never participated in another Agudat Yisrael convention. So it's not like that was a glorious, we all got together and everyone stayed together. A lot of politics happened, but I'm sharing all of this with you for a reason. And along comes the Satmar Rebbe.
What happened to these people?
I don't know. I didn't check. What happened?
Pira is still alive.
What happened with the Satmar Rebbe
We're difficult people.
was that he was part of this group. And he was actually, it was an interesting thing. To get the rabbis of Lithuania and Poland and Russia together was not the end of the world. To get the rabbis of Hungary on board. Do you know what was different about Hungary than the rest of the European Jewish populations? Anybody Hungarian in there?
Yes, but I don't know the difference.
Mostly Hasidim, right? Satmar, Mooncatch, a lot of groups came from there. What's different about them? It's always been about them. 300, 400. Well, yeah, that's for sure, but it comes along with a big package. They were the most extreme, most fanatic, most religious of all the other groups in Europe.
Kidding.
No, Hungarian, even today, Williamsburg is made up almost entirely of Hungarian Jews. The reason they live in Williamsburg is because they refuse to live with the other Jews in Borough Park. Now, I go to Borough Park and I feel like I'm not even Jewish, right? But they won't come to Borough Park or to Muncie because it's not religious enough for them.
But was that the majority?
My aunt used to live in Borough Park, which is in case my cousin lives in Muncie. But I know my uncle walked from, at the time he was in Czechoslovakia, and he was one of the pioneers in Israel. But I was sitting with a Polish guy, and as soon as I said I am my parents, he asked me where I'm from. I said Mexico. Your parents? He said Hungary. He stood up and left. I didn't know. I had no idea why that happened.
It's like your story with the Holocaust survivors.
They would not sit next to each other.
We were playing backgammon in the middle of the game. He stood up and left.
Right. So, for example, Mea Shearim. You know Mea Shearim in Jerusalem?
Yes, it's very much.
What is the headquarters of Mea Shearim? You know what it's called? It's a little neighborhood inside of Mea Shearim. Yeah. It's called Batei Ungarin. The houses of the Hungarian Jews. They were the aristocracy of this. Today it's like bubbling fanaticism of Israel is from this place. They were at the root of almost all of these breakaways. The Satmar Rebbe was all fine and dandy with Agudat Yisrael until the founding of the State of Israel. Comes 1948, the State of Israel was founded. There was a big crisis of faith inside of the Orthodox Jewish community of Eastern Europe. There were those Orthodox Eastern European Jews that, hey, we're all opposed to the State of Israel. We don't want Zionism. But now that there is a State of Israel, what is our attitude towards it? I mean, they're not asking us anymore. We're no longer at the place where we can try to convince people not to have a state. Now there is a state. What is our attitude? So the world split into two. The predominant approach of the Orthodox Eastern European Jewish rabbis were, if they exist, so we have to accept it and just go along with it. We're not pro it, but we're not against it. And this translates into, we'll take money from your school, from your government to fund our schools, and to build our houses, and to do all kinds of things. We wouldn't have chosen for you to be the leaders of this country, but if you really are, so hey, we'll come along and just protect our own interests inside of this organization. The Satmar Rebbe, you might say, hey, he at least stuck to his ideals. He said, I don't understand. If you're against Zionism, and you're against secularism, and you're against a secular Zionist state of Israel in Israel, how could you just go along with it? How do you sit in their Knesset? How do you have the audacity to take money from a group of people that you don't believe should be there? And the Satmar Rebbe said, I'm going to New York. He did. He went to New York. His Chassidut is based out of New York. The Satmar Rebbe has other breakaways in Jerusalem that follow his mentality. There's a group in Mea Shearim called Toldot Aharon. They're the Torah Karta broke away from Satmar and were later excommunicated by Satmar because they were too extreme. See,
They
Satmar.
only speak Yiddish.
Well, Satmar is all for going against Israel, but they're not for joining Iran. That's where they draw their line. They're
Oh,
You know-
but they did shoot to the Arab.
no, not Satmar.
No.
The Torah Karta would. Satmar.
You're right.
No, Satmar are big lovers of Jews. They just are not big lovers of Zionism. The Torah Karta, they're just big lovers of the CNN cameras. That's what they do. So wherever they can go and get on camera, that's what they'll do. Satmar and their breakaways, for example, live in Israel. And they build buildings, like the Toldot Aharon just built a big building next to my in-laws' house. And they didn't take a penny. They don't take government funding. They have, let's say in Israel you have 20 kids, so you can get all kinds of benefits, tax deductions, all kinds of things you get. They don't take any money. They just let it sit and rot in the social security offices. They are boycotting the state of Israel. They live in Israel. They're boycotting the state of Israel.
Well, what's the purpose of that? Is this a little,
They can't.
little
They-
lack of integrity?
It's not really true because they still use the roads. They
Oh,
still
thank
have
you.
the garbage taken away.
Right.
You
They're
can't
still
live
using the
there.
stoplights, and they're still putting their garbage out, and they're still right. Okay, I'm with you on. But I don't belong to this group at all.
But they
I'm just
still
saying.
pay their taxes, right? And they still buy things.
No, they don't. They're not paying taxes.
Oh, they don't.
The state
How
of
do they
Israel,
not pay taxes?
it's a small group of people. It's not huge. So the state of Israel has this like silent. It's not written anywhere, but it's like a status quo with them. You don't accept us. We don't accept you. Don't expect us to respond to your phone calls. We won't expect you to respond to our phone calls. That was the status quo for a while. Still is that way a little bit. It sounds very funny, but it's kind of its own little country inside of Israel. It's a
How many people are part of this little country?
The neighborhood is not bigger than
A couple from here, let's say to Rachel's house.
right.
Like
Meaning
5, 6
2 blocks. No, not even. How big is Meshach?
Yeah, but
Okay,
the
6
little
blocks.
blocks.
6 blocks, right?
Not 6
We'll give it
blocks.
to you. Inside of a whole state of Israel, it pales in comparison. Even compared to Orthodox Jewry in Israel, which is not part of this world at all. It pales in comparison. But you should know.
But they're very visible. I mean, they're very, people know about it.
Right, because they like to get on camera. And it doesn't help they don't dress differently from everyone else.
Should we just go to the door?
Who's that? Okay. If somebody we know, then okay. Yeah.
If the Satmar don't pay taxes, and don't accept Israel, but they take advantage of everything that's
Well, they don't really live in Israel. Both the Satmar Rebbe's live in New York.
the group that lives
You mean
They
the
have
Torah
a
and
small.
Satmar live in
No,
New York?
not in the Torah Karta. We're leaving them out of the Jewish
every
puzzle.
group is there and lives, and they have their garbage taken, and they have the mail, and they use electricity, and blah blah blah. And they don't pay taxes. I mean, somebody's paying for them to enjoy these.
So we said this already in our Israeli Independence Day class. I don't want to go back
I
here.
had a deal like that.
They said, hey, we didn't choose for you guys to be here. We were here under the Turkish, and we were very happy. We were here under the British, and we were very happy. Along you guys come and say, hey, this is your country. It's not our country. We don't believe it. We don't have any common denominator with you. You say, we should serve in your army. We feel just as close to your army as we feel about the Turkish army, or about the British army. The Turkish army kept you safe. How come you didn't serve that? Well, they view the Israeli army the same way as they view any foreign occupation of the land of Israel.
So they feel like they're in the good last year.
Yes,
Yeah, absolutely.
They speak Yiddish.
But I'll tell you the truth is, I respect their integrity. I don't respect them. I respect their integrity. I'll tell you why. Because the other 95% of Orthodox Jewry, also those in America, also those that you go and pray with them, they don't support the state of Israel at all. They'll give nice speeches when there's war in Israel. Like, oh, we should pray for the soldiers. I'm not taking away from them their little bit of humanity
But they all go
that
to
they have in
visit
them.
Israel. They have their bar mitzvahs and their
They all
weddings
go,
in Israel.
but
They
not
go to
out
yeshivas.
of not out of a Zionist ideal, out of a Jewish ideal to be connected to the land of Israel. Every Jew, there's no Jew who doesn't believe in the land of Israel being ours. Maybe there are, but not in the Orthodox circles. But these Jews don't believe that the state of Israel represents them in any shape or form, and that's not a fanatic approach. aside from what's left from Sephardic Judaism and what's existing in modern Orthodox Jewish circles, that is the stance of Orthodox Jewry in Israel and outside of Israel. The state of Israel does not represent us. Hands down, that's the majority approach of Orthodox Jewry. Not the part that I belong to, but the part that most of you belong to. Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not something they hide. It's harder in America to hide because here you have to be politically correct, and they're afraid to talk about their real approach. But that's the view. If that's the view, I'll tell you, I was sitting in Baltimore in Yeshiva. And there's a school that used to come around and collect. They needed help. There's a network of schools in Israel called Chinuch Hatzmai. Chinuch Hatzmai is it means independent education. They provide private schools for the religious sector in Israel, according to their own standards, and they were funded by the state of Israel to a certain extent, because they said, listen, the religious Jews won't let us educate them, so let's at least put together an official group that you will be the umbrella organization of the religious schools in Israel, and we'll have some kind of dialogue between us, our Ministry of Education, and so to speak, your Ministry of Education. As the years went on and Israel became less and less involved in the status quo and more involved in becoming the country that it wanted to become, a lot of these little arrangements fell to the wayside. And one of them was this agreement between these private schools and the state of Israel. And I remember there was a rabbi that came. I owe a lot to my mother went to school because of the Chinuch Hatzmai movement. So as much as I don't agree with them, I have to appreciate that part of my being who I am is because they were there for my parents when nobody else was. Out of their ideal to save Sephardic Jews from the Zionists, listen to what I'm telling you, they didn't like the Sephardic Jews, but they didn't like the Zionists more. So their whole thing was, how many Sephardic Jews can we bring into our ship so that we can outdo the Zionists? The equation was not out of a love for other Jews, it was from a hatred of a movement that they didn't want to be a part of. Chinuch Hatzmai came and they said, hey, the state of Israel cut 95% of our funding. They're evil people, how could they do such a thing? They're taking away food from thousands of little school children in Israel. And as I raised my hand, and I got in big trouble for it, I raised my hand and I said, I must have been in 11th grade or 12th grade. I said, well, do you celebrate Israeli Independence Day in your schools? No. Do you teach Zionist Israeli history in your schools? Absolutely not. I said, do you teach your students to respect the state of Israel? That was the answer I got. That wasn't a no, it wasn't a yes, it was just a I said, so why in the world should they pay for your education? And how are you not embarrassed to ask if they should pay for an education that doesn't believe in their agenda? There's an agenda. Every government has an agenda. And if you don't fit into that agenda, just expect that you're not going to be taken care of. So that's what Satmar does. Satmar says, we respect that they don't respect our agenda. And we don't respect their agenda, so we'll do our own thing. How do we get here? Agudat Yisrael, Chavetz Chaim, these rabbis. It was a generation where...
Conference was in Poland.
In Poland?
In Poland, in Kehillat.
There you go.
There you go.
What happened was that generation was defining Jewish philosophy as to what's going to happen when the Jews come back to Israel. I have to tell you that in that time there was a chief rabbi in Morocco. His name was Harav Amzalig. What's his name? Harav Amzalig had a letter that he put out. He had students who went to Israel and were being told all kinds of bad things about the Israeli government. And this is already later, a little bit later, in the 50s, the early years of the state of Israel. The Jews in Sephardic countries left what year?
Around about 56, between 56 and 60.
Earlier, I think. 51.
When did the Sephardic Jews leave Sephardic countries?
48.
48.
The state of Israel.
They were the first people to suffer the repercussions of a state of Israel.
They don't have
Suddenly, all
refugees.
Jews in Israel were considered, all Jews outside of Israel were considered enemies of the Arab countries because they were part of the Zionist alliance, or whatever they were accused of, and were thrown out of countries en masse. By the way, all the Jewish groups that lobby the Germans for reparations and all kinds of things like that for Jews who were in the Holocaust, I've never understood why they haven't made an issue to lobby the Yemenite government and the Moroccan government and the Iraqi government and the Iranian government.
Not everyone in Morocco left in 48.
I'll tell you about Morocco. One second.
But then the king closed the doors.
I didn't tell you about Morocco yet. What happened was that Morocco was the only country that did not expel the Jews. The Jews from Morocco left between the years 60 and 63. About that was the. So there was a chief rabbi in Morocco until the 60s. And this chief rabbi, Rabbi Amzalig, put out a letter which I have in his own handwriting. I have a photocopy in one of my books. I don't remember where he writes about a person who spoke about David Ben Gurion. He said, "Al tigu b'mshichai uvinvi'ai al tareu." He said, "Do not touch my Mashiach, and do not speak ill about my prophets." That's what he said about David Ben Gurion, knowing that he was secular, knowing that he didn't observe Shabbat, knowing that he was fighting the religious community. That philosophy, by the way, has died out completely. I don't even know who is still part of that philosophical group. But in Europe, this was a raging conflict, and that sets the tone today for all the groups that came out. But the Chavetz Chaim, part of his thing, and part of the book that was going around, they were all getting ready to go back to Israel. The question was with who and how and what's going to look like when we get back to. These who were studying how to be Levites or Kohanim, what were they planning when they came back to Israel? What were they planning?
To resume
build the rest.
They were planning on going to Israel and building a temple. They weren't waiting for something to fall out of heaven. That wasn't the approach. So you have to imagine that inside of already 100 and some years ago in Europe, there are groups that are getting ready to build a temple. None of these things. Today you have like a temple institute and they're all fanatics who believe in the temple. No, these are not new Jewish groups. These are old Jewish groups that may have just changed names and forms, but they've been around for a long time. And this is my point. You must study Jewish history. Jews study all kinds of things. Parsha, we study Tanakh, we study Halakha, we study Jewish philosophy, we study all kinds of nice things. We study Chassidut, we study Kabbalah, we study Musa, we study everything we study. We don't study Jewish history. Without Jewish history, we'll never know where all these opinions came from. When I read a writing of a certain rabbi, I'm assuming that part of, not all of it, but part of his approach comes from where he lived, the family that he had, the rabbis that were alive in his generation, the secular movements that were going on at the same time. You'll notice that Jewish feminism popped up as soon as secular feminism popped up. So the Jewish feminist movement is not a movement that happened in a vacuum. There was also, part of it was the culture that was going around it. The same thing with all kinds of different movements that have started in the Jewish world. From the Rambam and his family, we think a lot of their philosophy just came to them on their own. There were certain Muslim groups that were very dominant in those periods, the Salafis, they were called. Salafis? They were the predominant philosophical group at the time. Sufis, I'm talking about. Sufis. Sufi Muslims. And the Rambam's son and him rejected and accepted certain philosophical approaches from the Muslim groups that were around them. Like you accept certain values from the Christian groups around you or the Western democratic groups around you.
Society we live
Right,
in.
it's a normal thing. But if you don't know the history, you think everything just happened because that was this one's opinion. You'll never truly appreciate the richness of where all these things come from. Rav Weinberg, let's finish for today on tolerance.
Oh, I'm enjoying this.
So let's continue the talk. If you have a question or something to continue with.
I think the lack of knowledge of Jewish history is it's what responsible for all kinds of Jewish groups with certain ideologies, and even against Israel and against, because the lack of knowledge, because the lack of history, they look to, what was first, what was
second, what it looked like once upon a time.
Well, ignorance, creates a lot of problems.
There's also certain willful ignorance, a certain desire to not know what was because it scares us to actually think about it.
Of course, it doesn't fit if it doesn't fit my...
Now, if I would show you that not so long ago, there were generations of entire Jews, religious Jews, who didn't wear tefillin.
Why?
Sure.
Didn't Jude put tefillin on?
Sure.
Why?
Because they didn't care.
Religious
Like-
Jews
like-
who didn't care.
Like we will go down in the books of history as religious Jews who didn't care about the mitzvah to live in Israel, right? We're going to go down in the books of history like that as well. And every generation will go down for what it went down on. But there weren't, sure, religious groups that just certain things they didn't do them, or they didn't care about them, or they didn't. And hey, welcome to Hamud. Come, you want to teach the class? So there are. I'm not telling you that means you shouldn't put on tefillin, but we're afraid of our own history because it means that we weren't perfect, and even the times that we think are perfect, times of King David were perfect. I can tell you a lot of things about the times of King David that were not perfect, and were not great. Shlomo Melech, Chizkiyahu Melech, the most righteous king we ever had was Chizkiyahu. But you know what kind of things were going on in the days of Chizkiyahu? Amazing things, and not always amazing things. And we're afraid of delving into our history because it'll come up with a lot of imperfections, because we're people, and people are not perfect. And that's ignorance. Sometimes we choose that ignorance. We don't. It's not that we're ignorant. We choose to be ignorant.
When you go back that far in history, most people only see the strongest pieces, small piece here, a small piece there that remain. And that's what we study, and that's what
so
we learn.
accessible.
It's not so accessible unless you go back in and say, okay, I'm not just going to study this rabbi or what was going on in late 1800s. I'm going to study the whole culture in Europe and see what was going on and
But that's when you can exactly understand history. When we just study one aspect, one person, one development,
yeah.
we do not see the whole
That's right.
happening.
And you can't do Jewish history without it having the bigger context of the
course.
whole
History.
world history of what was happening, because Jewish history responds and reacts to what other. I mean, look at today. You know, you see it on the news today. We're all responding to something the American government is looking at doing. You know, so
But this is the way the world works. Nothing
That's right.
happens in a vacuum.
that's right.
And we like to gloss over certain things and paint history differently. And there are very glorious parts of our history and not so glorious parts of our history. A lot of the problems we face come from the non-glorious parts of our history that we refuse to talk about. A lot of times in these classes, you'll hear me mention all kinds of disputes and fights between rabbis that you never heard of before. And somebody once came over and said, Rabbi, I question the integrity of why should we study so much about the fights between different rabbis? That's Ima, I'm Abba. So, he's discovered an unglorious part of his history. Yeah? The reason I do that is because when then you see rabbis argue about something today, or Jewish denominations fight about something today, people get so afraid, what's going to happen if we're not united? Nothing will happen. We've been doing this for 5,775 years. We haven't been agreeing with each other. It's not going to change now. But if you're afraid, it's because you haven't properly studied. These arguments, these disputes, these fights have led to very beautiful and not so beautiful consequences in our history. Entire groups which were formed where we owe the world. Thank you that you formed such a group. Thank you that you had this fight, because then these people came out of it. And sometimes, thank you that you didn't, because look what had happened. We're 2,000 years later and 2,000 years more divided than we were 2,000 years ago. So, we have to know where we come from. We have to know everything repeats itself. It's not so scary. It happens the second time, the third time, the fourth time.